thank you for watching my channel today. My name's Sarah and my channel is called Your Tree Shelf, and today I'm filming my wrap up for April. So it was a really good reading month actually in April. I didn't do too well on my TBR, but a lot of that was because books came into the library from the women's prize that I'd reserved, and so for that reason, like, obviously I was going to have to prioritise those because they couldn't be renewed. So I'll kick off with something that isn't on the women's prize to start off with. So the first book that I finished in April was one that I had been reading for March and just happened to finish it on the 1st of April, and that was Father by Elizabeth von Arnim. So this was a classic that I was buddy reading with Joe, because we read one classic every month together, and this is what we chose for March, but like I said, mine just went into April slightly. This is a book which is quite quaint and quite sweet, and we are following, it's set in 1930s in London, and we're following Jen, who's our protagonist. She's a woman who I would imagine is either in her late 20s or early 30s, and she lives with her father. He's a writer and he treats her very much like his secretary. Like, he expects her to type his books and do editing for him and do and all the sort of household stuff and do kind of lots of things like that. And her mum died some years before, and then all of a sudden he says that actually he's met this girl who is a lot younger, like more like Jen's age, and he's married her and she's going to move in. And so Jen, instead of being upset, she's thinking, oh my goodness, this is going to release me from my life of, you know, looking after my dad. I can actually go and live my own life. So she goes off and she decides to rent a cottage in the country by herself, and she rents a cottage off the local vicar, and the vicar is completely under the control of his sister Alice. And it's basically about how Jen and the vicar kind of get to know each other, and Alice tries to keep them apart and sort of really disapproves of Jen and stuff. So it's a really sweet book, but I found that there were sections where absolutely nothing happened, and then there would be like a rush of activity. The ending was a bit too neatly tied up for me, so I think Joe enjoyed this more than I did, but for me this was a 3-star book. Then after that, I went on to Glory by Noviolet, Bulawayo, which was longlisted and we know now not shortlisted for the Women's Prize. And this book is quite divisive. I know a lot of people don't really like this book, but I did. I found it quite hard to read, but I was just, the star rating for me went up because of the skill of the author and what she managed to deliver. So this is a book I'm sure everybody knows, which is kind of a satire of Zimbabwe and Robert Mugabe's time as leader of Zimbabwe. All of the characters are animals. So we start off where there's a character called the Old Horse, who is the president of Zimbabwe. The Old Horse is a dictator. The people are living in poverty and there's unemployment and it's not good. They overthrow the Old Horse, and then we get Tuvi, this new horse, who is becomes the leader, who is representative of Mugabe. And they thought they had it bad before, but everything's going to get a hell of a lot worse now that he's in charge. And the animals are completely as if they were human. Like, they have mobile phones, they tweet on Twitter, they just completely act as if they're people. And I thought that there's a lot of sort of writing techniques in this book. Like, for instance, they repeat certain phrases again, and sometimes there's single words that are repeated for several lines and things like that, which kind of are quite a unique way of telling the story. And we have a character called Destiny who comes in sort of about a third of the way into the book. And Destiny has fled previously, but she comes back. Her mum's been looking for her for a really long time. She fled, and we find out what she witnessed and why she fled. And the stuff that she witnessed was like, the genocide was like so horrific. It was so hard to read. And so this was never a book that I really felt like compelled to pick up again. But I just thought how Noviolet Bulawayo had done the characters, done the story, her writing style and everything was very impressive, and I've never read anything like it before, and so I ended up giving it I think I gave it 4.5 stars. I'd probably give it 4 stars now, but I was sort of sad it didn't make the long list. But I know a lot of people haven't been able to relate to the fact that the characters were animals, and so it hasn't been the most popular choice. Then I wanted to read something that was much lighter because Glory was heavy, and so I then picked up a book that I've renewed from the library lots of times and finally thought, no, this is the time I'm going to read it now. And that was called Read with Pride by Lucy Powrie, and Lucy's a booktuber. She has released a YA trilogy. The first one I read last summer called The Paper and Heart Society, and I really liked it. And then this one is the second, and this is called Read with Pride, as I said. So this is basically about a girl called Olivia Santos who is in the Paper and Heart Society book club, which is a group of, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, I think 5 friends who are really into books, who are a little bit sort of like misfits in society, and they found each other in the first book. They all go to school. They're in kind of sixth form age, and when they go back to school for the next year of school, however old they are, there's stickers on the school library books which have LGBTQ content, and they have to have the students have to have parental permission slips signed to be able to read those. And Olivia is an LGBTQ person, and she basically is obviously really offended and upset that the school have sort of made her something which people need to get their parents' permission to read about. And she decides to start like a campaign of social justice at the school to get this decision reversed. And one thing I would say, which I really thought this book was really well done, like the previous one, I thought it was great, but it had a huge section on burnout in the book. So Olivia goes through burnout as part of everything she's taken on, like her schoolwork, her exams, this campaign and everything. And I wasn't expecting that. I think it did actually mention it on the back cover, but I wasn't expecting it. And because I'd gone through burnout myself, this kind of took me a bit by surprise and made me feel it brought it back too much. Like, Lucy wrote burnout very accurately, and it was a bit too close to home for me at the moment. Even though I've recovered from that, I felt really uncomfortable reading it, which obviously is a sign of her skill in how she depicted it. But I would just warn anyone who's kind of going through or gone through that recently, you might want to just read it when you're feeling strong. But the actual book itself is a complete delight, like the first one, and I did give it 4 stars. We then went back to the Women's Prize list again, to a book that's now been shortlisted, which is Black Butterflies by Priscilla Morris, that's the one. So this I loved. This was a 5-star read for me. So we are in Sarajevo in the Bosnian War for this book, and we are following Zora, and Zora lives with her husband in Sarajevo, and she's lived there her whole life, and her mum lives there. Her daughter married someone English, so her daughter is living in England, and she has a grandchild who's also in England. And the book starts with, so the tensions are rising between the groups who live in Sarajevo, and basically they go from living their normal life to living in wartime. And Zora asks her husband to take her mum to England to keep her safe, and she thinks she'll be absolutely fine, but they actually have this prolonged separation where the mum, her husband, her daughter and her grandchild are all safe in the UK. Zora can't communicate with them after a while because gradually all of the amenities are cut off. So water's cut off, electricity's cut off, phone lines are cut off. It's in the 90s, there's no internet. And so the family don't really know what's happening to her. She can't communicate with them. But it's the most incredible portrayal of what it was like to try and go about her work. And so she's an art teacher and an artist, and she's trying to go about her teaching, but there's like sniper fire on the way to work, and there's the food is like, the prices even for like bread is like so expensive because there's not much food, and then people are having to group together to help each other, and she lives in an apartment block, and so there kind of focuses on some of the other people that she lives with as well. And it was just like how her life can go from a normal life to being in a war zone, and how quickly certain things in the war zone become the new normal. But it was only a short book, but I really felt that she depicted it so like immersively, so you could feel how it was really hot in the summer, and how in the winter it was cold, so cold, and all the windows had like plastic bags over them because the glass had been blown out, and they couldn't sleep too near windows in case they got shards of glass blown into them, and how they had to, like, I remember her saying like she had to save the water that she'd brushed her teeth with for washing, and like different things which suddenly just became normal. And it was just amazing. I was so impressed with this book, and I thought it was fantastic. And I would highly recommend it. I was so glad it made the shortlist. I didn't think it would. I thought it would either be that or Wandering Souls, and I thought Wandering Souls would make the list, but it was the other way around. So I haven't read Wandering Souls yet, but I was really pleased that this was on the shortlist. I then listened to an audiobook, which I had on my radar for a while, and I used an Audible credit for this, and this was Bread and Wine by Shauna Niequist. So I hadn't come across her work before, but I know that she's been on Super Soul Sunday before with Oprah. So this is basically like essays about food and love and family and friendship and religion. And so Shauna is Christian, and she does talk about God in the book and her faith in the book, but not in a way that would put me off. So I don't identify with any religion. I believe in God. I have my own beliefs and everything, but I don't identify with any religion. And I definitely wouldn't say that. She's trying to push Christianity on her audience at all or anything. She's just talking about it in relation to her life, so I wouldn't let that put you off necessarily. But this is like a love letter to cooking and food and nourishment and all of the things that happen around the dining table with friends and family, and the meals that you share with people, the discussions you have around the dinner table, like the love of cooking. But also she does talk as well about like the shame involved with food, how women are kind of raised to be ashamed if they enjoy food, and talking about her body and stuff like that. And so how sometimes she'll love certain types of food, but then she thinks actually maybe I need to be a little bit healthier with my choices sometimes, how she balances those things out. But the whole thing was just a lovely, lovely collection of essays. Like, I really like food writing, and I really loved hearing about her cooking and about her dinner parties and her friends and her family, and how the meals they've shared together has kind of got them through difficult times and stuff. There is trigger warnings in here for fertility problems, for baby loss, like miscarriage. I'm trying to think. I think that's probably all the trigger warnings, but just to be aware of that, because it's quite difficult for her to conceive her second child. And so there is definitely stuff in there which you could find hard if you're going through that at the moment. But I gave this a 5-star. Gave this 5 stars. Shauna actually reads the audio herself, which I think is really nice. And I would love to read more of her stuff. I think she was wonderful. Really, really good. Then I went for a memoir on Audible, second to that, and this was called Don't Let Us Go to the Dogs Tonight by Alexandra Fuller. So this was interesting because I was listening to this at the same time as I was reading Glory, and this is also set in Zimbabwe, but this is set, so her family are white British. Her parents, so Alexandra's parents are white British, and they've gone and moved over to when it was Rhodesia, and basically it's written from the white perspective, obviously, because they're white. So I was reading their story while I was also reading the black people who live their story. And it was just quite interesting. It was completely by accident that I did that, but it was interesting hearing both perspectives at the same time. So Alexandra is called Bobo in this, like, that's her like nickname, and she has an older sister, and she lives with her parents, and again there is child death featured in this, just to be aware. And her mum loses children, like her mum loses 2 or 3 children and basically turns to drink. So her mum becomes like an alcoholic, but she's also like quite a strong person. She suffers with depression a lot as well. The dad is like a farmer, and they grow up in a time where it's extremely racist. So like the school is a white school. They very much look at the black people as second-class citizens, and Bobo's just like raised in this kind of this is the norm for her. And the mum is kind of coming towards a time when the white farmers were told to leave Rhodesia, and black farmers were given their farms by Mugabe, and it's her mum finds that like really tough, and I'm not sympathizing with that sentiment at all, but it was interesting to read about it. And there's lots of memoirs that she's written further on from this, so I'd be really interested to carry on with her life, because the narrator was brilliant on Audible. She was really good, and I thought Alexandra Fuller was very good at her writing her story. I thought the relationship between her and her sister was so good. Like, you could really, like, their little squabbles and fights, and how one grows up quicker than the other and thinks she's so grown up and makes Bobo feel like she's a baby, and like just all of the things that I thought she'd written that stuff so well. It just felt so real. I liked the relationship the family had and hearing about their relationship, but also obviously the political situation. And what I would say, my only criticism is that there was no acknowledgement, like at the end of the book or anything, from the author saying, I realise there's a lot of extremely racist opinions in this book. This is how we were raised at the time. I know better now. And I wanted that acknowledgement in there. It wasn't there, but I wanted that acknowledgement in there. But the actual book itself was 4.5 stars. Like, it was really, really good memoir. And I would love to read more memoirs that Alexandra Fuller has written about what happens next, because I think when the book finishes, she's still kind of like late teens, something like that. So I really want to know what happens to the family next. Then I had another Women's Prize book. So I read Memphis by Tara M. Stringfellow. And I am so gutted that this isn't on the shortlist, because this for me is my favourite of all of the Women's Prize books that I've read so far. It blew me away, completely blew me away. I haven't heard loads of love for Memphis. I don't know if that's because of the controversies that's been surrounding the author, or whether I just don't know. I don't know if people haven't given it a chance because of that. But for me, this book was incredible. So we're following generations of the same family in Memphis. So it starts with, there is like a 4th generation of, like, well, the first generation isn't mentioned too much, but the second generation is this lady called Hazel and her husband, and they're very much in love, and her husband builds this lovely house for her, and the whole book is set in that house with future generations as well. I'm not going to say what happens to them because that's a spoiler, but then, so our main sort of character that we're focusing on is well, it's hard to say actually, but we've got a character called Miriam, and Miriam has got 2 daughters, Joan and Maya, and she's in an abusive marriage, and she flees her abusive marriage and goes to stay in the house in Memphis where her parents, that her dad built, and she takes her 2 daughters, and August, who's Miriam's sister, is living there with her son. And one thing that is important to know, because there isn't a lot of detail, thankfully, about this incident, but August's son rapes Joan when she's 3. And I think that that's important to know, because obviously that's something that people may not be able to handle reading. You don't hear details. It's more about the aftermath of that event. So we've got bad things that are either done by or done to the men in this book. And it's about the impact of that on the women of the family. And it was really interesting because the author wrote this beautiful introduction to the book, which is dedicated to George Floyd's daughter. And she also wrote about, I think I don't know if I heard her talk about this in an interview. I think she wrote it in the book, that the black men in this book, they have a lot of problematic behaviours. And she explained how, because black men have been dehumanised for such a long time in society, a lot of the time the pain that's caused by that is taken out on the women in their lives. And that's how she wrote those characters. And I felt that all you can feel between the women in this family is this like amazing love, this connection, this ancestry as well. And you can hear, like, there's a lot about the music, and there's a lot about the food and the hair, because August has like a hair salon in her house, in her basement, and that's her business. There's stuff about like gang violence, police brutality, but overarching all of that stuff is like the love between the women and the community. So there's other members of the black community where they live who are kind of like family. And then Joan's dream, in the youngest generation, Joan's dream is to be an artist. And it's about her fulfilling her dream as well. And I just found this book moving, beautiful, shocking. It really made me feel like I cared about the characters. If something happened to one of them, I was gutted. It just really like hit me here. And I think there's so many books that we read where we enjoy them and then we kind of don't remember them very much afterwards. And this is one where the characters, like, I felt like I was reading about real people and I was caring about them. And that's like what makes the extra in a book is for me. And so I loved Memphis, and it's in my top books of the year, and I am really sad that it's not in the top 6 on the Women's Prize, but hopefully it would have got a lot more publicity because it was longlisted. So I loved it. And then the last book I read, which is the only one I can actually hold up to show you, is this tiny, tiny little short story here by Barbara Kingsolver called Homeland. And this was one Heather sent to me, actually, and I've still got her little note that she wrote to me inside. And I really liked this. So this is about a little girl called Gloria, and her grandmother is a Native American, and she had a son out of wedlock, and her son is married to a white woman, and they have 2 children, 2 girls, but Gloria's grandmother lives with them, and they want to take her back to the area where she was born to see it one last time before she dies, basically. And when she goes back there, there's nothing of her original, she doesn't really want to go back, I don't think, but there's nothing of her original ancestry and culture there, and it's basically just turned into this like really cheap, tacky tourist place where there's like fake Native American cultural things which are being sold for tourists. There's like massive cultural appropriation. There's people pretending to be from Native American tribes when they're not. They're just like putting on costumes and dancing around and pretending. And the grandmother's like, I've never been here, I don't know this place. And so it's just a story about that, but it's only 30, hold on. It's 40 pages, but it feels like you've read a lot more than that, because even though it's just short, and look how small the pages are, they're tiny, Barbara Kingsolver gets you in straight away. She gets you into the story, immersed, and this could easily have carried on for another 300 pages and I'd have been there. But it was really good. It was really, 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 really enjoyable. And I gave that one 4 stars just because I felt like I couldn't give it higher than 4 stars because it was so small. But that was that. So that was my reading month for April. So of those books, sadly, I only read one off my TBR, which was Homeland, because no, Memphis as well, so 2. All the rest were either like Audible purchases or library books, but good for the library books, you know, that I read them. And then nothing. I didn't have anything else to say. So they were the books I read. If you've read any of them, if you have thoughts on them, obviously please let me know. Let me know what you're enjoying reading at the moment, or what your favourite books were in April. I hope you have a lovely week, and I'll speak to you all soon. Bye.